We've done the US, we've done England, we've done Germany, and Canada was gonna be next, but a lot of people were suggesting that I do Australia next. And I said, Struth, that's a bloody good idea. Yeah, nah, she'll be right, no worries, fair dinkum. Would you believe me if I told you that I'm from Australia? With that being said, here is the best stadium in every Australian state, and the two biggest territories to bolster the numbers. Australian Capital Territory, the District of Columbia of Australia. More kangaroos though. It's a toss up between oval and rectangular, but I'm going oval on this one, Monica Oval to be specific. The odd thing about this place is that it doesn't actually have any professional team that plays here permanently, yet it's used quite frequently by both AFL and cricket teams from elsewhere. It's undergone some improvements recently, including these fancy press boxes, but the best feature remains the classic white picket fence that surrounds the field, which should be mandatory at all cricket grounds. New South Wales. It's around 80 times larger than Old South Wales. Less Welsh people though. It's a state that's home to 10 of the 16 National Rugby League teams, and Sydney itself has a ton of suburban rugby league stadiums, but I'm gonna have to go for a cricket stadium once more. Although it does host NRL as well to be fair, and AFL. Australian stadiums are busy. It's one of the oldest test cricket grounds in the world, having opened in the mid-19th century, and despite being a modern stadium overall, it has still kept some relics of the past in use. The Ladies Pavilion and Members Pavilion in particular, which are a charming addition to the stadium. Well, actually, the rest of the stadium is an addition to them. Northern Territory. When most people think of the stereotypical Australian, they're actually thinking of someone from here. TIO Stadium, or TIO Stadium, is a decent little venue considering Darwin's small size and isolation. Speaking of Darwin, it's actually been almost completely destroyed twice. Turns out if you name your city after someone who debunks creationism, it really pisses off God. Anyway, it's an Australian rules football stadium primarily, hosting the occasional AFL game. It did used to have a permanent semi-professional tenant, but they ceased to exist. It just consists of this one grandstand on the western side of the ground, as well as a large grass berm. Queensland. Without Queenslanders, bananas would be straight. The banana bending industry makes up 16% of the state's economy. I think it's about time we saw a rectangular stadium. Sorry Gabba, you're a bit boring. And sorry Cusack, you're just plain weird. And sorry, okay, this could run and run. I am of course going for Suncorp Stadium, home of the Broncos and Queensland when it's state of origin time. For now, it's the country's largest rectangular stadium, and some might say the best. The structure itself isn't on stilts, so it's not 100% Queenslander, but the amount of maroon throughout the stadium certainly makes up for that. I quite like the video boards directly behind the post at each end as well. South Australia, the only state that never received British convicts, and it's also the wine capital of Australia. I feel like the fact that they weren't making it out of a toilet gave them the competitive edge. Anyway, Norwood Oval is one of the more interesting State League footy grounds. There's an okay A-League ground, but the Adelaide Oval is probably my favourite stadium in Australia. And I'm not an Adelaidean before you ask. It combines modern architecture with a traditional cricket ground aesthetic, including a brick facade, old-fashioned manual scoreboard, a grass hill with fig trees, and some seats even get a cathedral backdrop, which isn't exactly important, but it's very fitting considering that Adelaide is known as the city of churches. Tasmania. This is by far the coolest state. For starters, it's an island. It also has the only name that isn't incredibly dull, and apparently it has the cleanest air on Earth. There you go Tasmanians, you get made fun of a lot for your hillbilly ways, so there's some positivity for you. The best stadium would have to be Blundstone Arena. This beachside cricket ground is the home of Tasmanian cricket, but it also regularly hosts AFL, as does pretty much every cricket stadium in the country. It has an odd assortment of stands, including the modern Ricky Ponting stand, and they haven't even tried to match the colours, but overall I think it looks pretty good, and I always like to see a grass berm in a cricket ground. Victoria. Most people know it's home to Ned Kelly, the iconic bushranger, but even more iconic is Victoria's fine dining scene. Both the dim sim and the Chico roll hail from here, and yet Italy and France get all the accolades. Usually I don't bow down to peer pressure and just choose the stadium that would appease the most people, but as a Victorian, you can actually face several years in prison for discrediting the MCG. So I can't even consider Amy Park or Marvel Stadium. The Melbourne Cricket Ground is almost as old as the city of Melbourne itself. It's the home of footy, the home of the Boxing Day Test cricket's biggest annual event. It's hosted the Olympics and Commonwealth Games. It's the biggest stadium in the Southern Hemisphere, perhaps too big. And while it might not be the prettiest stadium going round, this multi-tiered behemoth is by no means ugly. Western Australia. It's the biggest state, or province, or prefecture, or oblast in the world. And oddly enough, the population is almost exactly the same as the area in square kilometres, about 2.6 million. The stadium situation is pretty similar to South Australia. A decent A-League stadium, several suburban footy grounds, and the obvious choice. But they do also have the WACA, an iconic cricket ground. However, the obvious choice is the obvious choice. At over 1.5 billion Australian dollars, it was the most costly stadium construction in the country's history. I love that bronze exterior, and the interior is a smaller, more modern MCG really. In some areas there are 5 tiers of seating, and rather than the huge light towers of the MCG, all the lights are roof mounted, which is actually pretty rare in stadiums used for cricket. A fantastic venue to end with. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, have a good one.